Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Authentic Sound podcast. And while Stefan was waving to you, for those who watched the video version of this podcast, we have a fascinating episode for you today, evolving around Robert Schumann. And we're going to have two chapters in this podcast. The first part will be, of course, dedicated to his metronome marks, and especially the metronome marks for his Kinderszenen. Very important piece, which has also the Träumerei. It's maybe one of the most popular classical music pieces that we know today. And it's fascinating because Schumann left quite some metronome marks. He was very precise in that, as we also will see by Dr. Michael Struck, who is the chief editor or scholar, so to say, behind the Händle edition, the Urtext edition. And it's fascinating because when we dive into Schumann's metronome marks, we see a problem that is equally problematic, so to say, as Beethoven's metronome marks or Chopin's metronome marks, and it's exactly the same thing. And so how do people respond to that? How did people respond to that in the early 20th century? We will have a source by Godowski, which will blow your mind what this person had to say about Schumann's metronome marks and his judgment, so to say, musically. But also we will go to Alfred Brendel, because Brendel was, and still today, is considered to be one of the leading musicians in terms of music of Schumann. And he wrote quite some articles. I have his book here, in which he also published an article about Schumann, and more specifically about the Kinderszenen, and also about the metronome marks. And that's very interesting, because what are you supposed to do as a musician when you adhere to a single beat, so a modern reading of the metronome marks, which means like a read tick corresponds to a note value in the metronome mark, and it seems that it is too fast. So how are you going to explain that at one hand you want to stick to the score, including the tempo indications that were given by the composer, and at the other hand knowing that you will not follow them? So that's very interesting to see how people like Brendel, and he's not the only one, but we don't have a lot of musicians that are so openly sharing their thought process, but like people like Brendel, how they deal with this dilemma, because it is, of course, the solution, as the listeners know for now. And if you're new here, I will tell it right now. The whole beat solution, whole beat metronome practice, which is a very simple method where you consider the metronome to be like a pendulum, and then you take both swings, so back and forth, as one unit. Of course, music changes a lot. I have to say, the Träumerei, for people who are not aware of that, you know this piece in whole beat and not about exactly. Everybody on this planet, except when he or she wants to make a case against whole beat and then tries to push the tempo, but everybody else plays the Träumerei still today in whole beat. That means technically half, quote unquote, if you want, Schumann's metronome mark. So this will be two chapters. The second chapter will be, of course, a listening experience where we're going to compare some of Brendel's performances, also with the comments that he made, compare that to the recording that Alberto Sanna, our partner in crime, so to say, the brilliant pianist that works with us since years, made at the very beginning of our collaboration. And in fact, it was one of the first performances that he made. So I don't know if he would like us to share this recording, because definitely he would do things differently, but it doesn't matter. We're not diving into the details of performance practice here. It's just a very nice example to compare that result of when you play Schumann in whole beat compared to Brendel. And that, I think, will suffice as an introduction. If I have forgotten something, Stefan will for sure have some corrections.
In case you have forgotten anything. No, you have talked for too long, as always. No, just kidding. And yes, I mean, if people want to see me waving at the camera, that's the most important part of a podcast. Of course not. They have to go on Patreon, or they have to go over to Substack and be a premium subscriber, you could say. Then they can see me waving at the camera, and more importantly, probably they will see all the stuff that we share on screen while we make these podcasts, because if we talk about certain sources, we share them on screen. We obviously try to read them also, but yeah, people might want to see them. But
it's interesting and also important, because by doing that, you support the work that we are doing. Mm-hmm. And this podcast, we are doing this now a few months, and we like it very much. We also have crazy plans in the future to expand. We would like to have guests on the podcast. But of course, all of that comes with a lot of preparation. And for now, we are just setting up everything to make that happen. But your support would be more than welcome to make that happen in the future. But Stefan, let's dive into it right away and go maybe to our first source, and then we can talk from there on the topic that we want to share. Maybe Godowski would be a very good start. Maybe you can pull it up.
Definitely. I mean, just as a general comment before I do that, again, this is one of the instances where I was able to play these pieces myself when I still played the piano. Yes, not all of them, but part of them. I think like number 1, 2, and Träumerei, of course, and I think Am Kamin as well. So I played like 4 or 5 of these, and yeah, that's always interesting if I remember these pieces from playing them myself. Which in a lot of cases that's not true. I mean, for a lot of these pieces are too difficult that I played them. I mean, one of these Chopin etudes that we just made a podcast about, I managed to do that as well. Barely, I remember, but yeah, that makes it more interesting for me as well. And I think it's maybe a good start that we just take a look at something before we start the whole conversation about this.
Okay.
And that's what you read on top of the Kinderszenen. And this is the first edition. You can find it on IMSLP. And what you read is Kinderszenen, leichte Stücke für das Pianoforte, komponiert von Robert Schumann. And yes, my German is
it's
quite good.
Quite impressive, I have to say.
Thank you. And of course, if you translate that, it's easy pieces for the pianoforte composed by Robert Schumann. Okay. And I mean, that's just as an indication of what we are talking about. We are talking about easy pieces for the piano. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we are talking about scenes from childhood. I think that's what it's actually translated to in English. And yeah, these are supposed to be easy pieces that probably most people can play. So just as to put like a frame on the pieces that we are talking about. And with that, I think we head over to Godowski, right?
Yeah, let's do that. And then we see in Godowski, so Godowski was like a child prodigy of his time. He was born, I just looked it up, I think like 1870, and he died like 19-something. So he made an addition. He was a very important musician. He was born in Lithuania and was actually became an American citizen. So he made this addition on Schumann's childhood scenes, so to say. And then in the introduction, he talks about Schumann. And if you scroll further, Stefan, you come into his kind of interpretation, suggestions for the pieces. And then you see of foreign lands and people, the sort of first piece, he gives a metronome mark. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But he writes there literally the metronomic indications, so speed regulations, throughout his series of pieces are attributed to Schumann. With a few exceptions, the tempo is incorrectly given, owing either to a defective, improperly adjusted metronome, we're going to talk about that in a second as well, or to the composer's incomprehensible lack of judgment in deciding the speed of every number. Now, I have to ask you, and literally you, Stefan, you are like a semi-outsider as a mathematician. You have here like a very important musician, Godowski, makes an edition that's published. It's not like an edition for just a few people. It was an official, important edition. And these metronome marks are so incomprehensible to this person that he feels the need to really write something in the lines of like that Schumann had an incomprehensible lack of judgment. So there is no fiber in his body, no brain cell in this man's head that was thinking like, is Schumann wrong, or am I not seeing something? So what do you make of that if you see something like this?
It's ridiculous, to summarize it very quickly. I mean, I have some other annotations about this or comments about this thing, but I mean, if you just take a step back for once and have a think, as you like to say, you sit on your chair and you question everything, and if you then take a look at this, just at the first metronome mark, quarter note 58. If we go to the first edition by Schumann, it's quarter note 108. So he practically gave half the tempo of Schumann, and then you should ask yourself the question, what is wrong here that this person gives double the metronome mark that I give? And but that takes, of course, a little bit of, you have to question yourself. And if you tell me this person was a child prodigy in his days, you could be very harsh and say maybe he was a little bit too full of himself
Yeah.
to say these things. I mean, but it's absolutely disrespectful of Schumann. And I mean, a person composed these pieces and gave a metronome mark. And I think the comment basically shows, well, maybe it's less directed towards Schumann, but more directed towards the metronome in and of itself, and saying, yeah, the metronome is actually irrelevant anyways. I mean, his was broken, it was wrongly adjusted, whatever. The metronome actually is bullshit. And I mean, if you look at the metronome marks that he gives, it's always written as metronome mark about quarter note 58. And that's like, yeah, this is not an exact tempo indication, but it should be like somewhere in the range of 58. And if you just scroll down to the second one, that is about correct, and this would seem more appropriate about, and this just gives you, I think he just didn't care about the metronome at all, but he needed to make a comment. So maybe it was more directed towards the metronome rather than Schumann, to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, yes and no. What he was doing here, of course, is correct in Schumann's metronome marks. He gives there for the explanation. And in that time, like early 20th century, I think this edition is from about 1915, metronome marks, especially for older music, was not so relevant anymore. We come also in the tradition of like how people played it, and they were copying each other. There was an evolving tradition, so to say. So this doesn't go back to like the middle of the 19th century. That he gives now in the first and in some other pieces, of course, the Träumerei as well, like whole beat metronome marks or interpreted whole beat metronome marks is a coincidence. He didn't do that by itself. We talked in the Chopin Etude episode with Pollini, where he makes this sudden rubato, sudden tempo shifts, in fact, where he highlights the expressiveness of the music. Remember that in the previous episodes that we recorded. And there also Pollini hit like whole beat exactly, or a little bit slower. So it's again one of these examples that when people just think for themselves, like and question the metronome mark, they come oftentimes with a whole beat metronome mark. Here we see it published, which is actually super important, super interesting. The fact also, Stefan, you have to keep in mind that Schumann, at the end of his life, was in an asylum. So he was contained there, he self-contained himself. I mean, he wasn't out of his mind. What happened probably was that Schumann was affected with syphilis, if I say that like that in English, in the 1830s, and that has like an impact on your nervous system. And so probably at the end of his life, he had more troubles with his nervous system than with his mental state, but he also was like kind of a depressed person. Like, you have terms for that, I don't know them in English. So there was a combination of two things, and of course they couldn't handle with that. And in 1915, Godowsky, still in the 19th century, raised, there was something like Schumann was not taken really seriously because of that. People that went out of their minds, they were not considered to be like very serious anymore. So that might have been contributed also to the courage that he had to just say this about Schumann. But when we take that in a larger perspective, the larger context, it's actually the same. How you frame it, it doesn't matter. If you question a metronome mark given by an important composer, well, you can say like it's an incomprehensible lack of judgment. But even if you say like in the case of Beethoven, we have so many remarks by people, and the book will have like a huge collection of that, where people just say like the metronome marks are of course correct because they're Beethoven, but there's always this but, like, and then they go and say, but this doesn't make sense. This is not possible. That's not possible. Even when you say it with the most extreme, I would say like not honesty, but like respect for the composer. Like, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. When Beethoven gives a metronome mark, you can be sure that he tested that and that it was his ideal tempo. When Schumann gave a metronome mark, you can be very sure that it was like an ideal tempo. And we will see in this podcast more of this, and of course in the article of Brendel, because Brendel is in another time. Brendel lived in a time where he could not give any more like comments like that, but in a certain way he did that to Clara Schumann. Clara Schumann, of course, in the 80s, in the 90s, maybe the article of Brendel was, I think written in the 80s, was not yet of the same height as Schumann, and so on. So you see the struggle of these people with these authentic, original metronome marks, and it's always in one direction. They're too fast. In this case, as we will make it also in clear in Brendel's case, they're always too fast. Even Brendel admit, like in some pieces, you have to be a technically well-oiled player. And that, of course, put in contrast with leichte Stücke, like you just say, easy pieces. We're going to come back on that because people today say, like, yeah, but easy pieces, Schumann meant compositorial easy pieces. He didn't mean from a performance practice, but we're going to touch upon that in a second. If you agree with me, just head over to the Michael Struck article, our interview, because there we will find something very important.
I will do exactly that. But one comment. Every time someone says the metronome marks are accurate tempo indications, they are correct, but I will give you a rule of thumb. Whatever comes after this but, that shit stinks to heaven. I mean, it's every time people come up with some of these excuses like, but they had different pianos, they had different this, the metronome was broken. I mean, you give me whatever you want. They used tempo rubato differently. The instruments didn't have as long of a tone. So they played this, they just wanted everything to be played swifter, and it's just whenever there comes a but after the sentence, metronome marks are accurate tempo indications, they are correct. That shit stinks. That, to summarize it very shortly. And if you hear someone, that but probably is bullshit. That's some bullshit reason that they had to come up with because they couldn't play the metronome marks. Right?
Yeah, I'm not in this position to say that strictly that clearly as you, but I mean, yeah, it's true. You cannot.
That's what it feels like to me. I mean, maybe of course I'm over exaggerating now, and there might be some cases where the but is absolutely justified, and there are misprints of metronome marks. Yes, of course.
Yeah. But then the but can be like a nuance as well. But in this case, where you have the metronome marks in itself, it's such a simple thing. It's a frequency per minute.
Yeah. It's a frequency per minute. And I mean, the but cannot be, but they were only meant for the first 4 bars, or they were only meant like this, or they were only a rough estimate or something.
Yeah.
This but is in almost all cases, it's complete bullshit. Sorry.
Yeah, it's bullshit in a sense, yes. Yeah, of course it is. But it's, of course, a way of finding intellectually an escape route, because like Godowski could just reprint metronome marks like in a different way, like he said quarter note 58, where Schumann had quarter note 108, and people didn't care because there was also the culture like in that time. And when we talked about the early recordings that we have, that's later actually than 1915, much later in fact, but we refer to that, or we as a musical society refer to that often like that's like the echoes of the past. No, it's not. It's just people in that time was still like completely in this idea of progress of art, of evolution. They saw tradition as something that was an upgraded version of what happened in the past. They were aware of that. So it's not that when Godowski said like Schumann was wrong, that he would, if he would have understood Schumann, that he would have gone to the original metronome marks. He wouldn't. He would just give the updated version. That was the case. Today we are a little bit in a different situation. We still do not want to go back to that time. That's my firm belief. People struggle with that, but we are further in that awareness, and the interest also in reconstructing what was in the past. So we cannot flat out and we will see that with Brendel, writes in the same way as Godowski. And you see that also here in Dr. Michael Struck's telephone interview. Struck is like one of the leading scholars in Händler Verlag, so he is the Schumann scholar, he's a Schumann expert, and these people are very knowledgeable. I mean, whatever criticizing notes that we will have in this episode, I'm not criticizing this man. I mean, that would be fascinating to talk to him. And these people struggle as well, in the sense that they see the problems with Schumann's metronomization, and if only with Schumann's metronomization. And I can understand that you do not see a way out of that, and it's maybe also not his task to do. We come back to that in a second again, and another referring to what we come back in a second. But let's first go to the first question to Michael Struck, which is obviously the metronome of Schumann was broken. So the question is, are the printed metronome markings in Schumann's works really correct, quote unquote? And then Struck says, and that's a very important answer, yes, it is secured that they are correct. Yeah. And that's very important, that a scholar has the courage, so to say, and I know what I'm saying, so to have the courage, he knew that was a statement. And then he goes on to the story of Clara Schumann, really told once in a journal over in an article that her husband's metronome was broken. She came back to that. So, I mean, it was just made up. We can talk about that why, but this is an important statement, Stefan.
Yeah, and he says it here beyond any doubt. It's secured that they are correct. The story about the broken metronome is untrue. Full stop. So this is out of the question. He also confirms in the next question that these metronome marks are really done by Schumann himself.
But Stefan, can I pause there for a second? I mean, that's how far we are gone today. Like, we are talking here, there's someone who interviews Michael Struck, publisher, editor, so to say, Händler Verlag, and you ask him the questions, are these metronome marks really from Schumann himself? While you have like all the editions in the world that say that they are from Schumann. You have all the letters of Schumann. I mean, Schumann's archive is like incredibly well preserved. He was detailed in his daily whatever. Fortunately, in the Second World War, part of that was destroyed, but still we have so much. And then you pick up the phone to interview Michael Struck, probably an official interview. It says copyright by Händler Verlag. And then in the interview to one of the great scholars on Schumann, you ask, like, are these metronome marks really from Schumann? It's like standing in the Cathedral of Antwerp looking at the Rubens paintings, like the biggest name in the Baroque painting and with the biggest names of scholars of Rubens, and saying, like, are that really Rubens paintings? I mean, I'm sorry that I'm like agitated a little bit, but it's like it shows how far we are from a real understanding of these tempos. That's like they are so incomprehensible to us that we can. That's the background of this question of the interviewer. Like, it's not possible that they are from Schumann because Schumann was a great musician, right? He would never have given these metronome marks. Yes, he did. And
that's I think where this question comes from. I mean, all these questions that you have here, they point in one direction and one direction only. Why do these metronome marks that we have for the Kinderszenen by Schumann, why are they not making any sense? Why are they not used? Why are they not played? I mean, I will just read the questions now. And just from the questions, you will gauge... Yeah, I mean, it's of course, it's an interview about Schumann's metronome markings. Of course, they are talking about metronome markings. But the questions are actually only in one direction. And you will gauge the direction yourself. So question 1, are the printed metronome markings really, in Schumann's works, really correct? Second question, were the markings really made by Schumann himself? Third question, very interesting, could it be that Schumann and Böhme simply confused the reference value? For example, could they have intended eighths instead of fourths? For instance, Schumann set the tempo for the Träumerei at quarter note 100. Böhme went as far as writing quarter note 132, but if you divide that in half, namely eighths in place of fourths, then you are approaching today's tempo of the Träumerei. Last
And
question.
whole
Tempo
beat, by
is
the way.
yes, that's exactly the whole beat description. Full stop. And fourth question. Tempo is not equal to speed in music. Tempo has the quality of flexibility, but is still something that quite decisively determines the character of the piece. So do I understand correctly that you appeal to the musicians to take Schumann's original metronome mark seriously? And
Unbelievable question, right?
yeah, I mean, it's
like tempo is not equal to speed. I mean, tempo is literally the speed in which you're going to play the piece. Of course, what he means is like you have more elements to that.
Yeah, but of course there are more elements to that. But the point I want to make is all of these questions come from one direction and one direction only. And that is these metronome marks don't make any sense. So we're going to ask him about all the options that could be true. I mean, Schumann was a great musician. We agree on that. These pieces are amazing. That's cool. These metronome marks, they don't make sense for these pieces. So we're going to ask all the possible questions of why these metronome marks could be wrong or ignored.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe these are wrong. Maybe Schumann didn't write them himself because if someone else wrote them, they are irrelevant. That's
but it doesn't change the conversation, by the way.
No, but in their mind, it's irrelevant if they're not from Schumann. Yeah, I mean, maybe there was a confusion in the reference value. Don't know how close you were to the truth there, my friend. And the last one is, yeah, but you have tempo rubato. It's always the same. Sorry.
You know what I mean?
Bullshit solution. It's always the same solutions.
I have a name for these questions. Those are backdoor questions. You want to have a backdoor built in your illusion that these metronome marks are. And why do people don't disregard these metronome marks? That sometimes people say like, okay, but metronome marks are relevant because tempo is a personal thing, and blah blah blah. That's not what we research. We want to, in Authentic Sound here, our project, when the book is published, the book is not about what you should do and what not should do. We only want to know what are these metronome marks originally meant for, how were they read, and how what was Schumann or Chopin, Beethoven, or for that matter, of all the other composers actually thinking. What you do with that information is your problem, but you cannot have it both ways. You cannot say like, I want to stick to the metronome marks, but only in single beat, but then disregard them. And we're going to see that with Brendel. What the conclusion is, the metronome marks are taken seriously because that's a reference. They're disregarded instantly, but then taken again seriously to speed up as fast as you can. Because obviously that's what the metronome marks wants us to do, to play the pieces as fast as possible. And then I come and say that with our single beat tests and what have you, but you're not playing in the metronome mark that you say you need in order to speed up that much, and then we are dogmatic. So you cannot have it both ways, but that's the mindset of today, and that's the uphill battle also of this project. We are penetrating through all of that. We are saying, don't close those back doors. But if you close these back doors, this room suddenly feels like very, very narrow. Like you cannot barely breathe because what are you going to do? And then Struck's answer at the end, and then we can close this interview and leave it for what it is like very telling. And that's something I have two, and I said I'll come back to one remark in a second. Two remarks. One is that he should be more knowledgeable in saying like, when he comes to the reference problem, Struck is just saying like, that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. But I mean, I don't know if Struck knows about our project. You in the last podcast said I'm world famous. I wouldn't say that, but
you are.
For these people not to have seen anything on YouTube passing by, even if it is Stalzmann. If you like this podcast, the beginning of this podcast, and you want to listen to the full episode, go over to Substack. There's a link in the description box. Subscribe to Substack, because then you have the full audio version of this podcast. If you want to have the video version, there's also a possibility on Substack to subscribe for $5 per month, or you can have also the video podcast and support the entire project on our Patreon site. Links to all of these platforms below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. We see each other very soon again. Bye.